In the meantime, let's bring in Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas. He's chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Sir, I believe the last time that you and I spoke on this program, it was when there was the mail bombs that had been placed all around Austin, and you and I talked about that. I mean, there's a lot that Texas has gone through, all across the country, of course, but Texas in particular, your district, has been hit hard over the past year.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dana. The last time I was on your show, we talked about the Austin bombing in my hometown of Austin. My district stretches to the Houston area. This is right outside Houston. It seems like we've seen this play out too many times in our schools across the nation. They're very soft targets, if you will, and we need to harden these targets so we don't see this happen so frequently.
How did you learn the news today?
Well, I was actually, we were voting on the farm bill on the House floor, and I was notified by my committee team that there had been a shooting in Texas, active shooter playing out in my home state. And it was, this, again, it seems like we're getting this news way too often. The interesting thing is this very week I introduced a school security bill to help harden our schools from these types of attacks, to give Homeland Security grant funds out for active duty or active shooter training programs, also to help harden these targets, maybe the use of canines. And I think this is something you're going to have to see the Congress take a little more action and responsibility on.
I wanted to ask you that. I mean, do you feel the pressure from your constituents, and do other members of Congress that you work with feel like people, they don't want to turn on their TV and see this ever? And the Parkland shooting was just 3 months ago. We talked about, of course, there were the other mass shootings that we know about this past year, not even a year ago, the Las Vegas shooting, Sutherland Springs, Texas. But in particular for schools, and you're talking about the legislation you just introduced, would that be with any specific requirement, or would you allow the school districts to decide what works best for them?
I think it's always important to let local school districts decide what's best for them. Education's a local concern. This just enables and authorizes the Department of Homeland Security to assist schools and provide a grant funding program for them if they choose to do so, to provide this active shooter training program. And also, in this case, once again, not unlike the Boston bombing in Austin, we're looking at pipe bombs and pressure cooker bombs. These are illegal. There's no question about that. We can talk about the gun control debate, but these are illegal devices. And firearms are not allowed within a certain perimeter of the schools by law as well. But this is a grant program to help them harden, again, what I think to be one of the softer targets we have with our children right in the crossfire.
It was just this week that one of your colleagues from Illinois, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, in his district, there was an attempted school shooting, but the armed services officer that was there at the time was able to prevent a mass shooting from happening there. That obviously can't happen everywhere, but do you think that there is more of an acceptance, or at least an understanding, that if we do want to help protect these schools, there's no magic wand that can be waved, and that people accepting, perhaps, having these targets hardened is going to be a part of the deal going forward?
Well, it has to be. And I used to prosecute firearm cases as a federal prosecutor. In many of these cases, they're stolen firearms. The terrorists have AK-47s that are illegal on the black market. And I think what we need to do is look at hardening these targets, soft targets, with these school resource officers. In the Parkland case, we also, and I'm the biggest fan of law enforcement, we had a law enforcement breakdown where the FBI was notified, the sheriff's office was notified, and then you had these school resource deputy sheriffs just sitting outside the school as the carnage was going on inside. That's completely unacceptable. And I want to just give my condolences to the families in my home state of Texas who have gone through yet another tragedy here of 9 students being killed and 1 teacher. There's really nothing worse, in my opinion, than having to witness something like this.
No, the absolute tragedy of it, the shock of it. And we had a young woman named Grace Johnson. She's a senior at the school. She was in band practice or band class on the other side of the school. She said that her teacher was able to help them and make them feel safe until they were able to get reconnected with their parents. But also want to ask you, though, sir, about prevention, because as you were talking about in Parkland, at least in that case, in the investigation, we found out that people had seen something and said something about the shooter, and nothing was done to take his weapons away or to keep the weapons away from him. Right. And this idea of a gun violence restraining order, that would be something where, based on either a family or a coworker, they go to the police, law enforcement, and say, this person, we are worried about that person, and there would be a gun restraining order on that person at that point. Is that something that you would support?
Well, I mean, I think it's something we're looking into. Again, I think you have to deal with the mental health issue, as well. I think currently, if you're mentally adjudicated mentally ill, you cannot purchase a firearm. But I do think we need to look at creative solutions that do not infringe upon the Second Amendment, of course, but ways we can stop if we see a type of person like this in advance, ways to stop them. And, as I said, it's illegal to enter a campus with a firearm itself already. And so hardening, again, the soft targets, I think, is really one of the best ways to go here.
Congressman, I'm co-anchoring this hour with Trace Gallagher. He's out in California, and I believe that he has a question for you as well. Trace?
Thank you.
It is. Thank you, Dana. And I want to piggyback on Dana's question there, Congressman, because we talked about this whole investigation in the wake of the Parkland shooting, and the Orlando Sun-Sentinel did really yeoman's work on this, talking about Nicholas Cruz and the fact that he had 58 disciplinary problems over a 5-year span. And some of those problems should have sent him before a judge. But because of the Broward County system now, because it's very difficult to expel kids and to kick kids out of school, a lot of these kids can just repeat offend, and there's no consequences. Do you find that some of that is happening in your district in Texas? And if so, what's the mitigation for that type of stuff?
Well, I have 5 children, and they're all teenagers now, and they're in high schools and 2 in college now. But, that's something that, anytime I think, some of this responsibility is not all on the federal government. I think the schools and the superintendents and the teachers, when they see problem children like this, they really have an obligation to take it seriously and report it. And every high school has the local law enforcement component to it that I think need to be alerted to potentially problem children at the high schools. And I think that is a real responsibility placed on the schools themselves to make sure that you're protecting the other students in those classrooms if they see something like that, to say something to law enforcement.
And Congressman, we just cannot emphasize enough how much our hearts and our prayers go out to the people in Santa Fe and Harris County. And I don't think people around the country realize, when they talk about the students who were shot today and injured today, they don't realize the devastating times that these people have gone through. I mean, Hurricane Harvey came through Houston last summer, late in the fall, and they had 55 inches of rain in Santa Fe, and school was shut for the first week, and they got a lot of kids that lost their homes. I mean, this has been a very difficult 12 months for the people who live down in that area, and people don't realize that.
And Trey, thank you for saying that. I was on the ground right after when Harvey hit and saw the carnage and the destruction. I also saw some heroes out there saving 20,000 lives, but I think this part of the country's been through a lot. And then to have a school shooting, on top of it, it's the last thing we need back home. And I really appreciate your sentiment. And we also, in the state of Texas, I think appreciate the eyes of the nation, all the sympathy and condolences and thoughts and prayers that I've heard, and gotten calls from all around the country saying that to us. That really means a lot to us being in Texas.
And Dana, going back to you now, I just want to kind of make a final point, because we were down there covering Harvey, and the people who were in Harris County, I mean, we saw people come from all over the state, and they talk about, the political differences around the country, and we're close to a civil war. Man, people came from all over the state and from different states down there to help their fellow Texans in a time of need, and nobody asked what your political affiliation was. They just gave up weeks of their time to go and help. And I'm sure that if they could help people in the shooting in Santa Fe, they would do that as well.
No doubt. It's called the great state of Texas for a good reason. They have wonderful people there. Congressman, I did want to ask you about your experience on the Homeland Security Committee and as a federal prosecutor. I mean, one of the things that we know is that people who maybe have a mental illness, or maybe they're feeling lonely, and they go online and they're searching for a way to belong or a way to make a difference, or at least to get a name for themselves. And over and over again, we see the possibility that these shooters have sort of emulated the Columbine high school shooters. Of course, that was my home state of Columbine, is in Littleton, Colorado. And I just want to read to you something from KPRC Houston, reporting this, that the attacker was armed with an AR-15 style rifle, a pistol, a shotgun, and pipe bombs. Officers inside encountered a bloody mess in the school. Evidently, this guy threw pipe bombs all in there. We don't know if all of them went off. This report from KPRC Houston also says he had walked in with a trench coat and duffel bag, then just pulled out a shotgun and started shooting, and that someone pulled the fire alarm. I mean, I wonder what your thought about that in terms of the online recruitment that seems to come up over and over again.
Well, it's really disturbing. I've dealt with this a lot, Dana, in the sort of ISIS, Al-Qaeda recruitment training online and radicalization online. They prey on victims, in those cases more in the Muslim community. Now we have an individual who's not. He's obviously had some health issues here. We also know that he had been looking at some websites that were neo-Nazi websites, which disturbs me, you know, greatly. And the copycat cases, I can't emphasize that enough. For a disturbed teenager, you know, to be looking at this and thinking, how can I become, you know, a person that can get a lot of attention and copy what they're seeing happening right now here in Texas. That disturbs me a lot, and that's why we're probably seeing this more as we have more disturbed teenagers growing up that are trying to find a sense of belonging, a sense of a place in the world, and unfortunately, they are prey to these websites that lead them down the wrong path, whether it be radical Islamist terror, whether it be white supremacist terror. They're both terrorism.
And the legislative fix is hard to nail down. Congressman McCaul, thank you so much for being with us today. I'll turn it over to you, Trace.
Thank you, Dana.
You know, Dana, I just want to kind of update.